Morning, everybody. So, if you don't know me, I'm Rachel, and I'm a member of the church here. I've had the privilege of preaching here a few times over the last couple of years, and I think reflecting on this, I kind of realised that probably every single time I've probably mentioned that I'm a teacher, and I've probably mentioned that I like books. And one day, I might maybe preach without mentioning those things, but today, it's not going to be that day. I'm really sorry. So at my school, I work in a primary school. I'm in charge of reading because I'm a little bit obsessed and, I love reading. And my current project, the thing I'm undertaking, is to update the library, cataloguing all of the books, because I've bought in a fancy electronic system, beep beep thing, which is very fun, but does mean that every single book, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them, despite the fact that I've thrown away about 5 crates of books, some of them dating back to 1971 that I found, I have to stick a barcode in every single one, scan the ISBN number, scan the barcode, all of the things. It's taking me quite a while, as I'm sure you can imagine. And it's a massive job, and I'm getting a little bit obsessed, and I want to get it right. And I have several people who are willing to help me and have offered to help me, and I really need them too, but I'm always a little bit reluctant to ask for help because I need this to be done well. I need it to be done my way, I need it to be run right, I need it to look good, it's going to be great. And it's really easy to fall into that trap of I'm going to do it myself because it's better and easier if I do it myself, right? And I had some wonderful volunteers the other day, and they came in, some parents who are fantastic and give up their time twice a week and come and help me. And I bought some brand new books, and they stuck the label on the spine in the wrong place. And I spent far too long unpeeling the stickers and putting them in the right place and trying to make them look beautiful. Because on the shelf, right, it matters where the spine label is, yeah? Yeah. It's really tempting, isn't it, to want to rely on yourself because sometimes people just don't do things exactly as you want. And I know that when it comes to my library, as I sometimes fall into the trap of calling it, I tend to rely on myself rather than asking other people. But I need these volunteers. I need them to help me because I have not actually got time to stick hundreds of barcodes in because I do actually have to teach my class. That is something that I'm supposed to do as well. And it's a really easy trap to fall into, isn't it? The whole I need to rely on myself, or it's easier to do it myself because someone else might get it wrong, I'm not sure I can trust them, they might let me down, all those sorts of things. And actually, that's very much in line with kind of the thing that our culture would teach. Our culture approves of self-reliance, being independent, looking after yourself and not necessarily needing other people, standing on our own 2 feet. But this week, our sermon, the title which Matt gave me is The Sin of Self-Reliance. And so we're going to unpick a little bit today about this idea of self-reliance as a sin, which is very countercultural. It's very different to what our world might teach us. And we're looking at the book of Isaiah, aren't we? We're going through this series. And today we've got to Isaiah chapter 7. So I really recommend you having it open if you have a Bible or if you have your phones or any form of device. It may also come up on the screens, hopefully, as well, that passage, so you can follow along. It's quite a long passage, so bear with me as I read it to us. So Isaiah chapter 7, starting at verse 1, the sign of Emmanuel. When Ahaz, son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, the king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem, but they could not overpower it. Now, the house of David was told, Aram has allied itself with Ephraim, so the hearts of Ahaz and his people were shaken, as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, Go out, you and your son Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool, on the road to the launderer's field. Say to him, Be careful, keep calm, and don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of those 2 smouldering stubs of firewood, because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram and the son of Remaliah. Aram, Ephraim, and Remaliah's sons have plotted your ruin, saying, Let us invade Judah. Let us tear it apart and divide it among ourselves and make the son of Tabeel king over it. Yet, this is what the sovereign Lord says. It will not take place. It will not happen. For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is only Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be too shattered a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is only Remaliah's son. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz, "Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights." But Ahaz said, "I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test." Then Isaiah said, "Hear now, you house of David. Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of my God also? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. He will be eating curds and honey when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. For before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid to waste. The Lord will bring on you and on your people and on the house your father a time and on the house of your father a time unlike any since Ephraim broke away from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria." Let's pray before we look at this passage a bit more in depth. Father God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that all of your word is useful for teaching us, and we just pray that through this passage you would teach us, speak to our hearts. Holy Spirit, would you come and help this word to become alive in us today? Amen. So, firstly, I think I want to just unpick this passage a little bit more. I don't know about you. It's got a lot of names in it, a lot of places, and I know that when I read it first time, and second time, third time, fourth time, I didn't really understand what I was reading. I had to read it many, many times. I had to borrow like this higher stack of commentaries from Matt to try and help me to actually understand what I was talking about. It's a sort of passage that I know I've read before, but I don't know about you. Sometimes you read some things that you just kind of gloss over because you're not quite sure really what to do with it. So, a little bit by little bit to start with, if that's okay, just so we kind of know where we're at. So verse 1, when Ahaz, son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, the king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem, but they could not overpower it. So verse 1 is pretty much a summary of this entire passage. It's telling us what was going to happen. So the year was 734 BC. Ahaz was the king of Judah at the time, and he was about to be attacked by Israel and Aram. But it tells us here that as Isaiah predicted, the kingdom of Judah would not come to an end at this time. It did later, but not at this particular time. That's what Isaiah was encouraging Ahaz with. Verse 2 says, "Now the house of David was told, Aram has allied itself with Ephraim. So the hearts of Ahaz and his people were shaken, as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind." Ahaz naturally was frightened by the threat to his position. He was the king. He didn't want to be knocked off the throne. The reference here talks about the house of David. That's just referring to Judah, which is the southern kingdom. And Ephraim is the dominant tribe of Israel. So Ephraim is the reference to Israel, the northern kingdom. We've got a little map. I don't know if we can just quickly put the map up. Is that all right? Just a couple of slides on. There we go. So you can see there, perhaps, which might maybe help you kind of a bit of location-wise. So you've got Judah at the bottom in green, Israel, which is also referred to as Ephraim in the pink. And we can see towards later on in the end that Ahaz, who's king of Judah, makes a nice alliance with Assyria, which is really quite a large teal colour, so it probably seemed like a good move at the time. Thank you. So verse 3, we've got, "And the Lord said to Isaiah, go out, you and your son Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the launderer's field." So because Isaiah was a prophet, God used him, but also used his sons, and his son had a name that was prophetic too. So Isaiah was told to give his sons certain names, and one of his sons was Shear-Jashub, which means a remnant will return. And so although what a lot of Isaiah is saying is he's bringing judgment, he's bringing a lot of things that are going to cause problems, actually there is a message of mercy in here. God's plan was one of mercy, so a remnant would return and a remnant would be saved. And the location's quite important as well. So it's quite significant that Ahaz was by the aqueduct at the end of the upper pool, because he was expecting to be in battle in a time of fighting, and he was therefore checking on their main water supply, which is a very sensible thing to do when you know that you are imminently going to be attacked. And so Isaiah was directed there because God knew where he would find him. And then in verses 4 to 9, so verses 4 to 9 starts with, "Be careful, keep calm, and don't be afraid." And Isaiah is there to encourage Ahaz that even though Israel and Aram are there to attack him, it's not going to come to pass. He's going to be okay. They're not going to be successful. And that ultimately they would be destroyed. So he's encouraging him. That's what he's there for. To say, actually, God is in control. Those two people who are coming to fight you, they're going to be two smouldering stubs of firewood. That is like they're going to be completely destroyed. There's going to be nothing left. And when we move then to verses 10 to 12, this is quite interesting. So God gives Ahaz an opportunity to trust him and say, look, I've told you this is not going to happen. You can trust me. It's okay. And through Isaiah, God tells him to ask for a sign. If there's anything you want, from the deepest depths to the highest heights, anything you want. I mean, what would you ask God for if you wanted a sign? And he says, you can ask for anything. And Isaiah could obviously see that Ahaz was uncertain and he needed a bit of confidence. He was there to give him a bit of a boost and say, you just have to ask God and he'll show you that what he's saying is true. But Ahaz's response is interesting. He responds with an answer that seemingly sounds good, right? He says, I will not ask, I will not put the Lord to the test. And do you know what? It's even biblical because in Deuteronomy 6:16, it says, do not put your God to the test. And yet here, not okay, because actually God's told him just directly to ask for a sign. And he was disobedient. He said, thanks, but no thanks. And I'm kind of guessing that, to be honest, he had a plan and he didn't really want to hear what God was going to say because he probably knew that it was a different plan to what he wanted to do. And then in verses 13 to 17, we see this, again, it's quite an interesting passage. Ahaz doesn't ask for a sign, and so God's like, well, I'll give you a sign then. It's probably not going to be the sign you want, but I'm going to give you one. And he reassures him that he still won't allow him to be defeated this time. But he then references this promise that we might well have read at Christmas, where it says, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. It seems like quite a strange promise to give. And to us, we can read it and we can go, this is an amazing promise. It prophesies the coming of the Messiah, the coming of Jesus, and he will be God with us. How encouraging, how amazing. But actually, to Ahaz, it was originally a word, a promise of judgment. Ahaz was the descendant of King David, and God had promised that David's line would always rule over God's people. And so it looked like, for that to happen, that God needed Ahaz in order to be able to keep that promise. But God is actually saying, actually, I don't need you. I can bring your reign to an end, and I can start again with a virgin. Ahaz thinks he can do without God, but actually, God can do without Ahaz. And yes, God will defeat Aram and Israel, but he will also judge Judah because of their disobedience, their lack of faith in God, and their reliance on themselves. The reference just at the bottom to the promised boy growing up eating curds and honey, that was a food of poverty at the time, and there's probably a sign that Judah's economy will collapse and they were eventually exiled. So towards the end of this passage, we see that Jesus will come and he will be called Emmanuel, God with us, which is incredible. But before that will happen, both of Israel and Judah will have experienced defeat and they will both be exiled. So, as we said earlier, self-reliance in our culture is often seen as a virtue. It's good to be independent. It's good not to rely on others. That's a sign of strength. I can do it all. I can do it in my own strength. But God sees it as a sin. And sin is simply going our own way, not God's. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If we're relying on ourselves, we're not relying on God, so we're going our own way. And we can see the damage of this self-reliance in this passage in Isaiah. I mean, what would you do in Ahaz's situation? You've got those big powers of Egypt and Assyria. There are constant threats. So all the small little regions made little alliances to keep themselves safe. It's what everyone else was doing. It's logical, right? It's a good human plan. And in itself, it was practical, not necessarily wrong, but it was the wrong response in this case. Because God wanted Ahaz to rely on his plan, not his own. He didn't want him following the crowd and just doing what other people did because it looked good, it looked sensible. He wanted him to follow his plan. He wanted him to rely on him. And to rely simply means to depend on with full trust or full confidence. And so if we're relying on ourselves, really it stems from a place of pride, thinking we're better than we are, an overestimation of who we are, and a lack of trust in God and his promises. In Romans 12, verse 3, which I have on a slide somewhere, it says, "For the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourselves with sober judgment in accordance with the faith that God has distributed to each of you." Ahaz showed that he didn't trust God or his promises, and he kind of thought rather too much of himself. He was the king and he wanted to stay that way, and he didn't think God really had a right to mess with that. While I was preparing this, I've been reading lots of different things, and I came across this quote from Abraham Lincoln. You may have heard of it before, I hadn't heard it before. He recognized this danger of self-reliance in his proclamation for a day of national prayer and fasting in 1863. He said, "We have been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven. We have been preserved these many years in peace and prosperity. We have grown in numbers, wealth, and power, as no other nation has ever grown. But we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us. And we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we've become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us." And I can just hear how well these words kind of apply to Ahaz. He had so much. He was king. He'd been a king for a long time, and he'd been quite successful, but he'd forgotten God. He'd forgotten the things that God had done. And he thought that he didn't really need God anymore. He could make the plans. He could sort out all the problems. He would be okay. But scarily, I can also hear those words really relating to me. I wonder about you. I know that sometimes I forget what God has done for me. I forget how incredible my salvation is. I forget all the things that God has done in my life and how faithful he has been. And I can think that I can do it alone. I can do it without God. And I can forget in my pride to come to God and remember how much I need him. And so rather than this self-reliance, God is calling us to be reliant on him, to turn to him. And we've been, in our worship this morning, there's just been such a focus on fixing our eyes on God, putting him at the priority of everything we do. That needs to be where our eyes are looking. And so I've got three kind of main points I wanted to look at briefly, things I hope are helpful in kind of refocusing us and helping us to fix our eyes on God. So firstly, we can rely on God because he is trustworthy. I wonder, do you know you can trust God? How do you know? Why do you know you can trust God? It's quite helpful to reflect on that, isn't it, from time to time? Remembering the faithfulness of God. Remembering how he's come through in situations in your life. Remembering those times when he's encouraged you when you've been down. Because we all go through times that are difficult, but our God is incredible and so big. I know that I can trust in God because at the lowest points in my life, he's shown me that no matter how far I want to run away from him, he will never, ever leave me. I know that I can trust God because I've ended up in Leicester. That was never my plan, but I'm really glad that I did, and it was a good plan, and I'm very grateful for it. I know I can trust God because when I'm overwhelmed, even in the tiny things, I just don't have time on a day. If I come to God and I remember to come to God, which I confess that I don't do as often as I should, he helps me out. He makes time. Even in the smallest things, cancelling a meeting that I just can't afford to have the time for. He does little things that just help me. And let's be honest, we all have times when we're like Ahaz, right? When we show a lack of trust in God. It's so easy just to get overwhelmed by all the stuff, and we try and rely on ourselves. I rely on myself. I work harder. I make my own plans, and I don't consult God. I can make really, really poor decisions as a result. Maybe I shut people out. That's often a way I cope when I'm overwhelmed. It's like, no, I will focus. I'll put the blinkers on. I will just go forward, and I will get through today. Or I panic. I'm a bit of a panicker when everything is too much. And so we need to build our trust in God. And I was kind of reflecting a little bit on how do we do this? And I was thinking, well, how do we build trust with people? We get to know them, right? We ask them to help us. And we have to be vulnerable with people. I remember being in one school where I used to work, and at one point someone just said to me, "You never tell us anything about your life." And it's because I was really uncomfortable at that point in that school for various reasons, and I didn't really trust them. And I learned to trust them by opening up and getting to know people better and becoming a bit more vulnerable. And trust is difficult, isn't it? Because let's be honest, people are people. People are wonderful, but sometimes they let us down. They're not always trustworthy, but God is 100% all the time trustworthy. And we can build our trust with him in just the same ways. We need to get to know him better. We can always get to know God better, can't we? By talking to him, spending time with him, as Heather was saying earlier. Reading our Bibles and just understanding the word, understanding what God is trying to teach us through that. Asking God to help us and seeing him come through. It's so easy to say, I'm just not going to ask God because he's not going to be involved or interested in this small situation in my life. It's tiny, it's insignificant. But God cares so much about every area of her life. Ask him to help us and see what he does. And be vulnerable with God. Let's not even bother trying to pretend we're fine and sorted. God knows that we're not. I've cried before God. I've shouted at God. I've also ignored God. I've defied him. And you know what? He still loves me. Let's be real with God and be really, really honest, because he knows it anyway. And the other thing I was just thinking about in terms of building trust with God is actually we're only going to trust him more if we put ourselves in situations where we actually need him. Sometimes we think we don't need him and we just do things that are easy. But sometimes we have to push ourselves out of our comfort zones so we realise how much we need God. Quite a few years ago, I used to be part of Holy Trinity, and I used to lead a missional community group thing. And at one point, we decided it was a good idea. It was definitely a good idea, not an our idea, that it would be good to go, rather than meeting in the evening in our small group, to go out on the streets of the town of Leicester and offer to pray for people in the evening. This is not something I would ever choose to do out of my own comfort. It's just not something I'm good at or find particularly easy, but we really felt it would be good for us to do that for a period of time. And it was the only sort of thing that you can do if God shows up, because I couldn't do it on my own. And it was really incredible experience how, number one, the reason we don't often pray for people is because we're scared they're going to say no. It was amazing how many people said yes. People of different faiths, people of no faith at all, who would say, yes, you can pray for me about this situation or this. And I don't know what happened because I never saw most of these people again. But it was encouraging, and it built my faith seeing people say yes to prayer. But also the thing that it really encouraged me about was that the biggest reason we don't is because we're scared, right, of that rejection, that feeling of someone saying no. But what I realised was that it didn't actually offend me, and I didn't feel hurt by it. It was just they said no, they moved on, it was fine. No one was aggressive, no one was rude, they just said no thanks and left. And so it really built my faith that God was with me and I could do things, but I had to step out and do something that I would not actually want to do on my own. So we can rely on God because he is trustworthy, and so we need to make sure we're thinking about how we can build our trust and trust him more. Secondly, we can rely on God because his plans are better than ours. And I was just thinking, in contrast to the story of Ahaz, the story in Judges. It's Judges 6 and 7. I'm not going to read it now because of time. But it's the story of Gideon. And God told Gideon to fight, right? Gideon, terrified, wasn't a fighter, wasn't a warrior, didn't really want to fight. And he asked God for a sign multiple times, actually. It's the one with the fleece, if you know the story. And God graciously provided that sign so that he had the confidence and he knew what to do. And then God told Gideon his plan. His plan was take 300 men versus thousands. Which plan do you prefer, right? On paper, Ahaz is, right? He's got massive Assyria as an alliance. And actually, Gideon's was, you can take less people and fight the big people. Is that a good idea? God's plans are not necessarily nicer. They're not necessarily easier. They don't always seem logical, but they are better. And in Jeremiah 29, verse 11, that very famous verse says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. They're plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." God's plans for us are good plans. He promises that. God's plans for Gideon didn't make any human sense, but they were successful. And if Gideon had reacted like Ahaz, the story would probably have ended very, very differently. And the Bible is full of examples of people who thought their own plans were better than God's, and it never went well. If we don't know that God's plans are better than ours, effectively we're saying that we know better than God. And that comes back to the pride that I mentioned earlier. We're basically saying that we're better, no better than the one who made the heavens and the earth. And if you think back to that picture that Mike showed at the beginning, remembering to fix our eyes on that God, our creator God, how can we say we know better than him? How can we say that? So we do it all the time, but we've got to bear that in mind. And let's be honest, he knows us better than we know ourselves. Sometimes we like to think we know ourselves well, don't we? But we're very, very bad at knowing ourselves if we're really honest, and what's best for us. And you see it with young children, don't you? You see children wanting to touch something or take something or do something that is not good for them. And let's be honest, we don't necessarily grow out of it as well as we ought to. We do things, we go places, we talk to people, we put ourselves in situations which actually are not very good for us. They're harmful, they're damaging. And so God is reliable because his plans are better than ours. And thirdly, we can rely on God when we remember that our life is no longer our own. I've been reading a book by Christy Wimber, who's the daughter-in-law of John Wimber, who's the vineyard guy. Her book's called Transformed. I really, really recommend it. If you ever want to borrow it, just let me know. It's a great book. And she said this: I often have to remind myself that I gave up my rights the moment I said yes to Jesus. I am now owned by another, and it is now his will that is done in and through me, which often means I have to die to my own ideas of what I think I deserve. And I think we often become reliant on ourselves when we think it's all about us and what we want from life and what we want to get out of it. We strive to make things happen. We work hard and it's stressful. And let's be honest, it doesn't always go to plan when we do things our own way. But actually, we need to remember that when we have given our lives to Jesus, we have given our lives to Jesus. Like it says in Luke chapter 9, he says, then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Following Jesus, when we give our lives to Jesus, it will mean denying ourselves, and it will mean making sacrifices. He never promised us otherwise. It's a daily decision we need to make. We're no longer called to rely on ourselves and our plans, but to allow God to have our lives and to use them in the best way for his purposes. So does it mean that I can never make any plans or make any decisions and have a dream for my life? And no, it doesn't mean that, because lots of the plans you have, lots of the desires in your heart will probably come from God anyway. But we need to ask God to show us what is from him and where we're going the wrong way when we are. I've got a book on my bookshelf. It's one of those coffee table books that you don't necessarily read that much, but it's there. And it's called On an Open Palm. And it's just got a picture of a precious thing in a hand. And the book is about, because I have read some of it, but it's about how we need to behold our plans, our decisions, our dreams. We need to have them on an open palm. We need to have them in a way that God can take them away, and we're willing, we're not holding on tightly. So we need to hold our plans and dreams like that, loosely, so that God can take things, he can change things, he can move things, he can redirect our paths and our plans. I would like one day to be a head teacher. That's one of my dreams, one of my plans and one of my desires. And for various reasons, I think it is a God plan, I think. But I have to hold it loosely. I have to not try and force it. I have to be prepared to completely change my course of direction if that is what God says. And I have to be willing to completely let it go. And that's what we all need to do with our plans. If we have plans or desires or dreams, we've got to hold them loosely. Ahaz definitely thought that he deserved to stay on the throne. It was his. After all, he was one of David's descendants. So he held on to his plans tightly, even though God wanted to show him a better way. So reliance on God should be freeing, because we don't have to be right all the time. We don't have to know best. We don't have to do it all. We have this amazing creator God that we can rely on completely with everything that we are. And so, as we finish, just to remind you, we can rely on God because he is trustworthy. We can rely on God because his plans are better than ours. And we can rely on God when we remember that our life is no longer our own. We gave our life to Jesus. And so as Mike comes up and begins to play, I just want you to maybe close your eyes for a few minutes and just spend some time reflecting. I wonder if there are areas of your life where you're just finding it tricky to trust God. We know there's absolutely no shame in that. This is just a chance to be vulnerable with God, to know that he loves you and cares about you no matter what. But we all have times where we find it hard to trust God. There might be something really specific, like there's a specific situation that you're struggling to trust God in. Or maybe you're just not quite convinced yet that God can be trusted. And then I think for some other people, the idea of this self-reliance thing is something that perhaps really speaks to you. It's really easy to want to be self-reliant, to look after our own interests and to kind of get swept away by our culture, which says it's good to be able to look after yourself. You don't need other people. You just need you. But that's not true, is it? We need God. Without God, we mess up so much, make so many bad choices. It might be worth just reflecting on where you find that you are most self-reliant. It could be to do with finances. It could be to do with your dreams. It could be to do with your job. It could be to do with relationships. Where do you find that you are relying on yourself to make things work rather than going to God?